Greetings to everyone on this quiet and peaceful night. Tonight, I will try to take you into the winter days of a great empire that ruled the world stage for nearly 2,200 years and show you what life was like for a legionary soldier. Before I begin, please settle into a comfortable position, put on your headphones, and don't forget to write in the comments where and at what time you're listening from. If you're ready, let's slowly begin our journey into those cold winter days. Winter was felt differently across the vast lands of the Roman Empire. In the center of Italy, the cold was damp and bone-chilling. On the frontier of the Rhine River, legionaries faced cutting winds. And along the Danube River, soldiers struggled with snow-covered marshes. For a legionary, the change of season never meant a lighter workload. Winter was the time when discipline and endurance were tested most severely. The day usually began before sunrise. Legionaries dressed quickly despite the freezing air, pulling their thickened cloaks over their tunics and trying to get used to the icy surfaces of their metal gear. The cold of the armor instantly wiped away any trace of sleepiness. Campfires rarely burned through the whole night, but in the early morning, their warmth was barely noticeable, so soldiers relied on movement to generate heat. A legionary's first task on a winter morning was to inspect the camp. Tent ropes could loosen on the frozen ground. Trenches might fill with snow and overflow. During the changing of the guard, soldiers who had endured the night watch handed over their posts with red cheeks and numb hands. In winter, the struggle was not only against enemies, but against nature itself. Despite the reputation of the Roman military for its discipline and organization, winter remained one of the greatest challenges a legionary faced. The army adapted over centuries, yet the cold often pushed soldiers to their limits. To survive harsh conditions, each legionary relied on a combination of standard equipment, personal adjustments, and endless endurance. The most essential piece of winter clothing was the heavy woolen cloak known as the sagum. Thick, coarse, and resistant to moisture, it offered limited but crucial protection against freezing winds. Underneath, soldiers wore layered tunics, sometimes adding extra cloth bought from local markets near the frontier. Footwear posed an even greater challenge. The caligae, the army's standard sandals, were never designed for snow or icy terrain. To cope, legionaries stuffed them with wool or animal fur, and in some provinces, they crafted makeshift wrappings similar to primitive winter boots. Metal armor behaved poorly in the cold. The larica hamada, the chainmail commonly used in frontier regions, absorbed the chill easily, making early mornings especially painful. Touching a shield rim or sword hilt felt like gripping solid ice. Many soldiers wrapped leather around their grips or lined the inside of their shields with fabric to reduce the sting of the winter metal. Daily duties became twice as difficult during winter. Marching on frozen or muddy roads strained legs and slowed entire formations. A journey that might take a day in summer could stretch to 3 in winter. Rations, too, were harder to manage. Bread turned stiff, water froze in containers, and supplies from distant cities arrived late due to weather conditions. Hunting was sometimes necessary when supply routes became unreliable. Even tasks within the safety of a fortified camp demanded relentless effort. Clearing snow from palisades, repairing tents damaged by storms, and digging ditches in frozen soil consumed hours of labor. Winter punished anyone who hesitated, The discipline for which the Roman army was famous became a tool for survival rather than mere organization. Yet despite the cold, legionaries maintained a strict routine. They trained, patrolled, and guarded their posts with the same precision expected in any season. Winter did not suspend duty, it intensified it. Life inside a Roman winter camp was a carefully constructed balance between survival, discipline, and routine. Although the Roman military prided itself on its engineering abilities, even the best-built camp could feel unbearably harsh during the depths of winter. The cold seeped through leather, cloth, and timber, reminding every soldier that nature, not the enemy, was often the true adversary. A typical winter camp, especially along frontier regions such as the Danube River frontier or the Rhine River frontier, featured rows of standardized tents or wooden barracks. During long-term deployments, leather tents, papilio, were replaced with timber structures sealed with clay and straw to keep out drafts. Even so, warmth was difficult to maintain. Small braziers were used for heat, but they produced limited warmth and required precious fuel, wood that was often scarce or had to be gathered from dangerous nearby forests. Inside the barracks, legionaries slept on raised planks or straw-stuffed mattresses. The straw needed to be replaced regularly, as moisture from breath and melting snow turned it moldy within days. Personal belongings were few: a cloak, spare tunic, tools, and sometimes good luck charms picked up from distant provinces. Despite the cold, the sleeping quarters were organized with precision, reflecting the Roman belief that order itself could preserve morale. Food was another defining part of winter life. Life inside a Roman winter camp was a carefully constructed balance between survival, discipline, and routine. Although the Roman military prided itself on its engineering abilities, even the best-built camp could feel unbearably harsh during the depths of winter. The cold seeped through leather, cloth, and timber, reminding every soldier that nature, not the enemy, was often the true adversary. A typical winter camp, especially along frontier regions, such as the Danube River frontier or the Rhine River frontier, featured rows of standardized tents or wooden barracks. During long-term deployments, leather tents, papilio, were replaced with timber structures sealed with clay and straw to keep out drafts. Even so, warmth was difficult to maintain. Small braziers were used for heat, but they produced limited warmth and required precious fuel, wood that was often scarce or had to be gathered from dangerous nearby forests. Inside the barracks, legionaries slept on raised planks or straw-stuffed mattresses. The straw needed to be replaced regularly, as moisture from breath and melting snow turned it moldy within days. Personal belongings were few: a cloak, spare tunic, tools, and sometimes good luck charms picked up from distant provinces. Despite the cold, the sleeping quarters were organized with precision, reflecting the Roman belief that order itself could preserve morale. Food was another defining part of winter life. Standard rations included wheat, barley, salted pork, cheese, and a type of vegetable stew. In winter, however, these supplies hardened and became increasingly monotonous. Bread baked from coarse flour aged quickly. Some soldiers softened it by dipping it in hot water or wine. Meat, when available, was heavily salted to prevent spoilage. Water sources often froze, forcing soldiers to melt snow, an exhausting task when performed daily. Because supply chains slowed during winter storms, officers sometimes ordered small hunting parties into the surrounding wilderness. Rabbits, boars, and wild birds supplemented the diet and boosted spirits, though such outings carried risks. Thick forests hid not only animals, but hostile tribes, watching Roman movements. Despite discomforts, the camp maintained strict social structure. The centurion, distinguished by his transverse crest, enforced discipline without exception, winter or not. Orders were delivered clearly, drills were conducted daily, and punishments for neglect, such as failing to maintain equipment or showing up late for duty, remained unchanged. Hardship was never an excuse. Roman discipline was built precisely for such moments. Evenings were the only true respite. After duties ended, soldiers gathered around small fires, wrapped in wool cloaks, sharing stories from their homelands in Gaul, Hispania, Africa Proconsularis, and countless other regions of the empire. These quiet conversations, echoing through cold, smoky air, offered a sense of unity that training alone could not create. In winter, brotherhood became a necessity. A winter camp was not only a defensive structure, it was a small world shaped by fear, endurance, routine, and shared purpose. Every soldier knew that the colder the night, the more important the unity of the legion became. Marching was the backbone of Roman military power, but in winter, it became a test that separated the merely competent from the truly resilient. A legion's ability to move slowly, steadily, and in formation, even through freezing winds and treacherous terrain, was often the difference between holding a frontier and losing it. Winter campaigns were not preferred, yet history forced legions to move across icy plains, snow-choked forests, and muddy river valleys. A winter march typically began in darkness. Before dawn, trumpets signaled the legion to prepare. Soldiers tightened their belts, wrapped their cloaks firmly around their shoulders, and checked their gear. The contubernium, an 8-man squad, helped pack the shared tent and tools, loading them onto the mulus, the squad's pack mule. The animal itself often struggled in winter, its hooves slipping on frost-covered stones, its breath steaming in the freezing air. Terrain was the greatest obstacle. Along frontiers like Germania Inferior, dense forests trapped snow between branches, releasing sudden avalanches of powder onto marching columns. In open plains near Pannonia, icy winds had no barriers, slicing across lines of soldiers and forcing them to lower their heads and tighten their formation. Marshy zones, impossible to fully predict in winter, turned to half-frozen traps. Stepping on the wrong patch meant sinking knee-deep into slush and losing precious heat. Speed mattered, but survival mattered more. Roman commanders calculated daily distances carefully. Too short, and the army lost time. Too long, and the men would collapse from exhaustion. A winter march of 15 kilometers could feel like 30. Equipment grew heavier as snow accumulated on cloaks and shields. The pilum became slippery, and the shield straps stiffened in the cold. Every mile felt earned. At intervals, the legion halted to rest. Fires were allowed only in controlled conditions, and even then the wood was often damp, producing more smoke than warmth. Soldiers gathered around embers, rubbing their hands together, eating hardened bread or dried fruit carried in leather pouches. Conversations were muted. Breath turned to vapor in the air, creating a ghostly haze among the resting men. Crossing rivers in winter was an ordeal of its own. The Danube River, for example, could freeze on the surface while still carrying a fierce current beneath. legions used temporary wooden bridges, reinforced with stakes, or crossed at narrow fords where ice could be broken strategically. The noise during such crossings, axes cutting ice, officers shouting orders, shields clattering, could echo across the entire valley. Any mistake risked lives. A man falling into freezing water faced deadly hypothermia in minutes. Fatigue accumulated with frightening speed. Fingers numbed, making weapon handling difficult. Legs stiffened until each step became a battle of will. The threat of frostbite was constant. Soldiers instinctively stomped their feet or flexed their hands to keep blood flowing. Officers encouraged synchronized marching chants to maintain rhythm and morale. Winter changed not only the lives of Roman soldiers, but also the behavior of the tribes living beyond the frontiers. The cold season never guaranteed peace. In fact, many tribes across regions such as Germania Magna or the highlands near Dacia understood their lands better than any Roman commander. Snow, forests, fog, and frozen rivers offered them natural advantages. Thus, a legionary marching in winter had to remain alert, not just for the cold, but for the enemy hidden within it. Tribal warriors rarely fought pitched battles under winter skies. Instead, they favored ambush tactics. Hidden among snow-covered trees, they waited for the perfect moment. When Roman formations stretched thin during a river crossing, or slowed while climbing an icy slope, a sudden barrage of javelins, stones, or arrows could descend like a storm, leaving the legion to react in seconds. The silence of winter forests made ambushes even more terrifying. One moment the world was still, coated in white. The next, the crack of branches and the roar of war cries broke the peace. Roman commanders adapted by adjusting formations. Scouts, often local auxiliaries such as the Batavian horse auxiliaries, moved ahead to detect tracks in the snow, footprints, disturbed branches, or signs of recent fires. Soldiers marching near the front were instructed to keep shields raised against sudden arrows. Even the slightest change in wind direction or animal behavior could signal danger. Winter battles demanded different tactics. Snow muffled movement, but also slowed charges. Soldiers advancing through deep drifts risked losing balance. Cavalry struggled, horses sinking into soft layers of snow. In contrast, tribal fighters, used to the terrain, moved swiftly. To counter this, Roman legions relied on discipline, tight shield walls, controlled spear thrusts, and coordinated movements. The testudo formation, though heavy, could protect soldiers from missiles launched from tree lines. Visibility was another challenge. Thick winter fog rolling through valleys near Radia could swallow entire units. Trumpet signals were harder to hear in the wind. In these moments, training mattered more than anything. Each soldier had to trust the movement of the man beside him, advancing or defending by instinct and drilled memory. Not every encounter ended in combat. Sometimes, winter forced temporary truces. Tribal groups often lacked stable food supplies during the cold months, and Roman forts remained attractive targets for negotiation or raiding. A centurion might meet with a tribal leader to exchange hostages, trade grain, or negotiate passage rights. These moments, though tense, offered brief relief from constant vigilance, yet danger always returned. Even inside fortified camps, sentries remained on high alert. A snowstorm could give cover to raiding parties attempting to breach a palisade or steal supplies. Fires within the camp had to be carefully shielded to avoid advertising its location to watching enemies concealed in the darkness. For a Roman legionary, winter warfare was a mixture of patience, caution, and sudden violence. The enemy used the season like a weapon, one forged from terrain, climate, and knowledge of the land. Rome responded with discipline, strategy, and relentless organization. In this silent struggle between empire and wilderness, every footprint in the snow carried the weight of survival. Winter did more than test a legionary's body. It tested his spirit. Cold could cut deeper than steel, and silence, so heavy in the frozen months, often weighed more heavily than the armor on his back. Nights were long, days were gray, and the boundary between routine and despair grew dangerously thin. For many soldiers, the greatest battles of winter were fought not on icy fields, but within their own thoughts. Fear was a constant companion. Not dramatic, overwhelming fear, but a quiet, slow-burning anxiety that lived in the pit of the stomach. Fear of ambushes hidden by snow. Fear of frost that numbed fingers and made weapons clumsy. Fear that one mistake on a slippery road could end a life as swiftly as an enemy blade. Yet this fear was never openly spoken. Roman discipline demanded calm, and so legionaries learned to swallow their dread, burying it beneath layers of duty. What sustained them was not courage alone, but camaraderie, the silent bond formed among men who shared the same cold air, the same sleepless nights, the same unending march across winter's desolation. A legionary trusted the man beside him more than any shield. Around the ember of a dying fire, soldiers exchanged quiet words of home, of family, of small memories that kept their hearts warm. These conversations were fragile sparks of humanity in a season that seemed intent on extinguishing them. Despite fatigue, despite the monotony of frozen landscapes, morale survived through structure. Routine became a lifeline. Morning inspections, drills, guard rotations, equipment checks. Predictability gave shape to days that winter tried to blur together. To stop moving, to stop working, meant letting the cold win. So the Legion kept moving. But even in the harshest months, there were moments of unexpected beauty. Sunlight glinting off frost-covered shields, the sound of marching boots breaking fresh snow in perfect unison, the rare peaceful evening when the sky cleared, stars stretching endlessly over the camp, like a reminder that the world was larger than the cold pressing in around them. These were the moments that reinforced purpose, tiny, fragile reminders that survival meant something. A winter campaign shaped a legionary more deeply than any summer battle. It carved discipline into bone, forged loyalty through hardship, and taught each soldier the simple truth that endurance was the truest weapon Rome possessed. By surviving the winter, a legionary proved not just his strength, but his belonging to the greatest military machine of his age. And so, as our journey through the winter life of a Roman soldier comes to an end, one truth stands clear. Rome's power was not only in its legion's swords, but in their resilience, the ability to stand firm when the world froze around them. Through frostbitten mornings, endless marches, and silent nights, the legionary endured, and in that endurance, the empire found its heartbeat, steady, unwavering, and eternal. I have come to the end of my story with these sentences. I hope you liked it, and you are sleeping now. Good night again.